Should we get started?
Please.
All right. So first thing on the list is a standing item of new faces. Anybody? I think I see a few people here. Maybe I don't recognize. Anybody want to speak up if they don't attend working group meetings usually?
My name is Paul. I work at Greenhouse. I have an RFC open, and Emily invited me to come talk about it, so I'm here to try to do that.
Awesome. I'll make sure that gets on the agenda. Do we have that listed there?
Not yet. We were just talking about that, and I'm gonna try to add an entry at the end.
Awesome. Sounds great. Anybody else?
I've been here before, and now I'm back.
Nice to see you again. All right, moving on to the next item, Pre-1.0 API Compatibility Rules number 79.
I just put this up an hour ago, so if don't expect anyone to have read through it already. I was working on a larger spec compatibility version RFC that would also describe how we can migrate to 1.0, but I decided to carve out just the smaller portion of this to make a more limited RFC. So what it proposes is that pre-1.0 API versions, you can assume compatibility with future ones that come out. So it's just about lifecycle compatibility rules. It doesn't even necessitate that the spec itself can't remove features, but only the spec can't add things that are entirely incompatible with another OX API version, and that the lifecycle will maintain support for the older versions, even as it implements new ones. I think this should unblock us from adding a lot of new features that have been hung up on trying to figure out how to do that without causing pain for Buildpack and platform authors. So everyone read that and approve it if you feel so inclined.
My request to the leadership team and the interested parties from the platforms, please, can we expedite this one? It is definitely holding up a bunch of other RFCs, or not RFCs, a bunch of things that have passed RFC and can't make it into lifecycle implementations right now.
An example of something that's being held up?
Something like Buildpacks. We approved an RFC where Buildpacks can add labels to the exported image. And technically that is a change to the spec, so it should come out with a change to the API version, especially if Buildpacks require that feature, so they can indicate that they require it. But because the next API version is assumed to be non-breaking by our original rules, that would create a lot of pain, so we haven't done it yet. Our original sin was saying that until 1.0 every change is breaking, and that made a lot of sense in the beginning when we were changing things rapidly, but now I think we can make stronger guarantees about compatibility, and it would help us migrate to new versions.
It would also help us, there's long been a list of like a set of breaking API changes that we want to make before we hit 1.0, so that 1.0 looks better than it does today. And everybody's afraid to make those because you either have to do them all in one big bang, so it doesn't kill the platform vendors, or you just don't do them. And you do a bunch of incompatible minors that kill the platform vendors. So giving this and putting the onus on the life cycle to make things compatible allows us to start getting those breaking changes in pre-1.0 without killing the platform vendors.
A lot of those breaking changes are in a doc, but don't have RFCs yet. So it'd be good at some point to talk about a strategy for turning those into RFCs. But that shouldn't block this. I just feel like it something we should think about in the future. It'd be great to have a tentative sort of month we think we could hit 1.0 in. And I think we got quite a roadmap before we can hit that, mostly logistical things. Cool. Anything else on pre-1.0 compatibility rule? All right. Next thing on the list is RFCPR publish build pack.
Yeah, so Javier and I did some work together on the published build pack RFC that we've been talking about. And actually, just let me go ahead and share it real quick. This won't take too long. I'll just give an overview of the changes. Basically, what Javier came up with was, in addition to storing the URL and to the registry and the pack config, also storing a type. So the two types we would support initially are GitHub and Git, and then the publish command and probably some other commands would behave differently based on that type. And then each of those registries would have like an ID or a name, and you would reference them based on that that ID, that name. So actually kind of similar to what I was proposing last time, where you would pass like different flags to the publish command, but instead of passing flags to the publish command, we're sort of tightly coupling the type to the actual registry and its URL. So that kind of ends up, so basically what it means is you have a lot more stuff here about the config, and then it makes the publish command a little bit simpler, except that you have two different types of behavior based on the type of registry. And yeah, one of the drawbacks here is that, and this may have even been a drawback before, is that the type can't really be accounted for well in the build pack URI that we defined, which was this ND://. I think we had some options there though, like I'm not really even sure what that URL would have looked like before. Like, would it have been buildpacks.io as the host, or would it have been GitHub as the host? So I'm not sure that's actually based on this. Yep, and then some alternatives like inferring the type rather than making it explicit. So we could say, oh, it's a github.com host. Yeah, I assume that's a GitHub. It's a local file path. I assume that's a local Git repo. Yep, so take a look at those. We can discuss today, but I'd also like to get to the other things. So what do you all think?
This is ready in a way that it wasn't yesterday, like for us to review. Okay.
Yep.
Just one small question. The input to publish build pack, that's always a build package that's pre-published to a registry?
Yes, it's a build package in a Docker registry.
Got it. Thanks.
And then, yeah, so the first step is pull the metadata for that, or the manifest for that build package, and then you know all the other stuff about it.
Awesome. Any other questions about the published build pack RFC before we move on? Cool. Next one on the list is a working group video publication on YouTube.
We had discussed that once we started recording these sessions, and it appears to have worked to the best of our ability. The recording started automatically. The people on new enough versions of Zoom were given the disclaimer, which is really the best we can do, that we were actually going to publish them the way other CNCF projects do. Any strong objection to us doing that? No. And do we have an official CNB Google account for YouTube that will allow me to publish under some useful name?
I got an invite. I thought, didn't Javier or someone create a cool team or something? Seeing that he's not here,
Yeah, okay.
I don't think he can answer. But I did get an invite about something for Cloud and Buildpacks.
Okay. Okay, that is all I need. I will make that happen.
All right, and last but definitely not least, the RFC number 63. image exposes metadata for all layers that participated in an image's build.
Hi. Yeah, I wrote that. I tried to sum up what I was getting at in the title of the PR. At the time that I had written this, and I assume that it's still true, if you can Docker inspect an image that was created with Buildpacks, and it has all the metadata of the launch layers in the Docker inspect output. I thought it would be useful for me if we also if I could also see the layer metadata for non-launch layers, because and my this goes along with my particular use case, which is kind of wanting to know like all the factors that were at play during that image's build. So of course I want to know what version of a build pack I was using, but I also in my case, to be very concrete, I want to know the Git SHA of the application repo that the build pack saw when it executed against that application. I commented about that a lot in the RFC, like with my particular use case, but this I wasn't asking for like first-class support for that necessarily. Because I thought it would be good enough. Well, if we just get all the layer metadata in the image label somewhere, then I can put whatever I want in the metadata, and it'll be there for me. The bigger context around this is, well, I want to debug and like reproduce my builds like down to the the build pack version and the version of the application repo and whatever else.
Is there a reason that allowing or having a build pack that puts all of that information into the outgoing build pack plan, so it's attached to the bill of materials, isn't sufficient? Because the bill of materials also includes what build pack and ID and version a bill of materials entry came from.
I remember being asked this question, and I don't remember the answer. But someone definitely did bring this to my attention. I can try to refresh myself and see if I can come up with that, but I don't know off the top of my head.
The reason I asked that is over in the Paketo Buildpacks group, we actually do this. Like, I was unaware that this wasn't already happening because we have a bunch of build-only build packs that actually put stuff in the BOM, and so I regularly just confuse what's in the bill of materials versus what's in the image or layer metadata label. And it turns out that I had thought this wasn't a problem because we see all of this in the bill of materials. It's certainly not a requirement, right? Like, the big difference is it does require a build pack to explicitly behave in this way rather than just attaching layer metadata. But in some ways, I also think that that's a good idea, right? We expect the bill of materials to be much more user-facing than layer metadata specifically, as layer metadata is useful for the build pack to talk to itself in the future in a way that the bill of materials is something that you might want to expose to a user.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But like the build pack that was used to build it wouldn't be part of the bill of materials, right?
It is. If a build pack writes a build pack plan, that build packs is stamped on it. Have Emily say what she's going to say, and I'll show you.
So the two things. Number one, I think I might have scared people off commenting on this PR by complaining about the Git SHA on the metadata example, but I ran into a situation the other day where I actually really wanted that, so I'm duly sheepish about that and would like to retract it. But to Ben's point about the bill of materials, I do think the one limitation there that makes this appealing in addition to having the bill of materials is that when I'm looking at the bill of materials, I do want it to describe what exactly is in the image. So tools that only existed at build time, I would necessarily want that to confuse me to think that's in the bill of materials. I could see it as like metadata on a different entry in the bill of materials that provides context. So I think we'd have to be careful about how we added it there, so as not to give the impression that things are in the generated image that aren't.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking too. Like, it would be nice to know what version of Maven was used to compile this app, but that's not in my final image. And I don't want to get like a bunch of like prodsec requests to update Maven in my runtime images, you know?
Agreed, but I'm not sure. Well, I guess it depends on what you think a bill of materials is, right? A bill of materials is a list of what? Inputs, outputs, just arbitrary metadata associated with it. There is, I think we think about the bill of materials as something describing exactly what's inside of a image, but I don't think that is definitive.
The requires provides contract works just great with build time dependencies and is used that way a lot. And that always ends up in the bill of materials, right? So the way we've designed the API, bill of materials does not just describe the image at runtime, for sure. But I think
So
bill of materials, sorry.
I just wanted to show you, Joe, it does actually attach it. You see it down there at the bottom. And this JDK is a build time only thing, so.
I do think calling it bill of materials and having things that aren't actually in the image is confusing though. Like if I compiled an application, built my application with Maven, I'd want to see an entry in the bill of materials that describes that application, and then maybe in the metadata for that entry, it could give me information like what version of Maven I used to require it. But I'm not sure if it should be listed as a top level thing.
Just like backing up a little bit, going back to the original RFC requesting that the build layer information get put in there. The bill of materials is like a high level description of, you know, not thinking about the layers that comprise the image, but thinking about the semantic things that are going into it, Node.js, right? That kind of thing for end users to be able to say, okay, I had got a Node app here and it's built using these modules, and it's a high level description that's not supposed to describe the exact layout of the bits in the image, whereas the layer metadata describes these are the layers, here's information about each layer, right? The including information about the build layers that were used at build time to build the image seems useful because it tells you, these are the constituent pieces that were created in order to generate this thing at a lower level. There's also another thing that was, I think I brought up the bill of materials as an option to solve the same problem earlier. And the answer I think, Paul, you provided was something about being able to understand, because we have this caching mechanism, right? The build layers can come back in subsequent builds, being able to understand exactly which build layer was generated, if that makes sense, that was used to build this particular image. So that like, if you throw away your cache and do a rebuild and the build layer comes back and it looks different somehow, you know that, oh, it was this old one versus this new one. Did I articulate that right?
Yeah.
It was a conversation we had a long time ago, I think, somewhere in Slack.
it's actually still on Slack, and I found it. It's in that threads view.
So do we think then that
Sorry.
Yeah, that'd be great. So do we think then that the image layer metadata is a publicly contracted API that external parties should be able to depend on? Like, I think that the bill of materials definitely is that, but I have often thought of that layer metadata as only contractually guaranteed between a build pack and that same build pack at some point in the future. We have to put it somewhere so that we can get it back and hand it to the build pack in the future, but it isn't something that is considered an external API for other parties to participate in.
So I'm not sure the bomb is, like, we sort of expose it that way as like a public API, but I'm not sure there's enough trust in it that that like ProdSec isn't also just going to do image scanning and have more faith in that. So like, in some sense, I'm not sure the contract, like the outward contract, is as strong as we would like it to be. So it's just a data point.
It's not so much what people whether people outside trust it. It's whether we are making compatibility guarantees about it from our side, right? Like the lifecycle, it's not documented yet, but I know Emily is working on her platform spec rewrite where the actual schema of the metadata label, of the bill of materials label effectively will be specified, right? It will be a breaking change if we change things in it. You can, as a build pack author, decide, well, this is because that is something that is specified and people know that it will never change. When I put something in there and I put it in at a particular key, I now consider this contractual. Versus layer metadata, if that structure gets specified, now all of a sudden I want to change, I go into my my Go annotation, put some backticks in, so it says toml comma or toml colon, and it makes everything lowercase instead of the uppercase, or I go from dashes to underscores. Like, because that's now exposed and people have this belief that it is a contractual thing you can look at, it potentially leads to inadvertent breakages of tools that will depend on it. I don't personally have a problem, but I mean, like, if we're going to do that, that also needs to make it into the spec. There is this label, it has layer metadata on it, and here is the schema of the metadata that we put in, down to the contribution of metadata from layers themselves.
I think part of what Paul is looking for isn't just this kind of free-form stuff that put in the layer toml file that's a contract with the build pack itself, but just information about the SHA of the layer that was used, right?
Yeah.
So that you can trace that back and figure out which, is this older, is this newer? So I don't know if the RFC implies necessarily that it's externalizing that part of the contract, the metadata part of the contract.
I think
Not the internal metadata, agreed, right? Not the layer contributed metadata, but the structure of that label, of that metadata label, absolutely would need to be contractual.
I think the metadata to me is the important part of this, not the SHA of the layer itself, because you can already get that from the, the manifest of the previous image. I don't feel like this is changing anything that's maybe less than ideal about the contract of the layer metadata in some ways, because we're already putting layer metadata on a label on the image, and this is just adding more layers to the set of those that are included in that metadata. So I think whatever problems we might have there or discussions about how we specify it or not, this doesn't make those better or worse particularly.
I agree with that.
I can agree with that, but I think there's an implication, though, if we actually do this, like this goes through the RFC process and comes out the other end, we are effectively specifying it, maybe actually specifying it, and it ties the hands of the life cycle in the future. The life cycle can no longer make this change, or like can no longer change the structure of that at will, where I think today it is. Because you could depend on it, but the fact that that structure has never been documented anywhere is like a clear sign that the life cycle considers this to be an internal implementation detail that you should not look at. And that means the life cycle has all the prerogative in the world to completely change. It can change it from TOML to JSON to YAML to anything it wants, right, to a CSV delimited file. And if we accept this, the life cycle no longer has that privilege.
An argument would be we've been putting this metadata in exactly the same format on every image that's been produced by cloud native build packs for several years. If I think we're past the if we labeled it IO build packs, don't touch this or something, maybe that would be a one thing. But because we didn't take the opportunity to explicitly declare it as this is not part of the public API, I don't know how much the semantics of the decision fall out into practical outcomes, if that makes sense.
The spec is what defines the public API, right? Like nothing not in the spec is spec.
We're already constrained from making really radical changes anyways, because we have to be able to rebuild an image that was built by previous life cycles.
Is like report TOML from Matt McNew's RFC a place where some of this stuff could live in a more user consumable format that a platform could provide?
I do think that's another option, because we were saying organizing principle for that file would be to describe things that happened at build time that aren't captured in the exported image, right? So it's more information about the build process than information about the image itself.
And both places, right?
It seems that there's a risk in putting non-launch layers in the application metadata. The builds would no longer be deterministic if two builds resulting in the exact same image, but some layers, due to their availability as an already available launch layer, would not result in other build layers, which means you could be resulting in the exact same image because certain layers are showing up or not showing up. You could be moving around different digests, which would be a benefit of report.toml because it doesn't actually output, it doesn't actually change the resulting artifact.
Is an excellent point. Is this kills reproducibility in many cases. If we put build layer metadata in there, we are going to generate the same image. We can generate the same image twice and have the digest of the config blob be different, and therefore the digest of the manifest be different, and we've broken reproducibility for potentially lots of users.
The other confusing thing about it is we store metadata to disk before the build runs, and if it's not a launch layer, it's a cache only layer, the metadata we restore to disk is going to be the metadata that comes out of the cache, because that describes the layer we have available to us, even if it wasn't the layer that's used to build the previous image. I do worry if people will look at that and assume that the metadata they're getting is going to be the one on the image, and we actually can't do that because it doesn't describe the layer that exists in the cache that we have available.
I do want to say, Paul, like, we absolutely observe that the use case that you want to satisfy is a critical one. That's the reason why we've actually done, there are RFCs floating around, I don't know exactly what state they're in, to, for example, communicate source control information through the system. It is, in fact, special case source control information because it is so critical. And I do think that including information about the build is a good thing that we need to do. My concern is just about attaching it to the image in this particular way. So I think we can keep exploring this.
Yeah.
It seems like report toml is a really good way to achieve this goal, right? It gives everybody what they want. Is there a reason, Paul, that you'd want that metadata to be on the image as opposed to be a different build output next to the image that you could attach back to it if you wanted to somehow?
Well, I don't know that argument about this kind of making this change to the label affecting build reproducibility. That sounds really important. So I really sympathize with that. I don't know the report toml routes that makes sense to me. I'm trying to think of how we would how I would associate the image and the report toml myself.
If you didn't care about reproducibility, you could just throw report toml back on a label on the image afterwards.
Right, yeah.
What do we see report for you platform owners out there, Matt, KPAC, and the Heroku team and everybody else? What do you think you'll do with report toml? Is that something that'll be like shoved in as an entry in the registry next to the image manifest? Is it something that only exists in a MySQL database in your platform to be shown via UI? What is it? What are you going to do?
etcd for a few hours.
Yeah.
The primary use case, the primary original use case for report toml was to just read it after export, so we knew the exact digest that was produced by the build. But platforms like Pack could also somehow expose additional metadata about it. So really all we wanted was just the digest key.
You could store it in the registry if you really wanted to.
Yeah, it's not something that Lifecycle is planning on exporting out to a registry as an artifact right next to the image artifact it created. That's a question mark.
Yeah, I think our only two possible uses for it, at least that we have in mind, are like logging, like keeping around for debugging purposes, and potentially some kind of like user facing like trust interface where you can inspect what happened, but I don't think we'll use it for like a strong contract between security team and our team or something like, and what we're producing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it partly depends on what goes in report toml. Like if it expands to include some of this other information, I think users would use it more or want to have that information. Like if it solves Paul's use case, like I don't think Paul's unique in that. If someone coming to Heroku is building a thing, they want to, if for debugging purposes, want to be able to see that information pretty easily.
There is, to argue against myself, when we talk to customers, one of the key things that we love to emphasize is by stamping metadata onto an image, you don't have to write this reconciler, right? So like putting a bunch of stuff in the bill of materials about exactly which, spring jars are in there, exactly which version of the JRE does have value, because that same information can then be propagated onto pod specs and into deployments and things like that. You can just query a running Kubernetes system and find out all the JREs that are currently running in your system. So putting it out in a separate file that isn't attached does have actual downsides compared to putting the label in as well. It's something we need to take into account.
Does that policy information apply to strictly build time dependencies? Like I don't want images to make it into production if they were built with this version of Maven.
Yeah, no.
So
no, it's always down to like what's running in production when we talk about it.
I wonder if we have a almost bigger problem with this reproducibility thing and getting build time versus runtime information on images. Right now, if you use the build plan, to request, like we have on the Pacato side, we have a Yarn install build pack that requests Yarn from a build pack that just installs Yarn, right, for modularity. If you request that as a build time only dependency, you're going to get that in your bill of materials with a Yarn version. And if the Yarn version changes, it's going to break reproducibility on your image. I wonder if we're putting too much of the bill, if the idea of launch and build being special in the build plan comes back, and we need to exclude more information from the images we generate in order to hit that reproducibility goal effectively.
Again, the fact that we put all of this stuff into the bill of materials is exclusively a build pack convention choice, right? The fact that I put the version of the JDK or the version of Maven into the BOM is something that an individual build pack does. The bill of materials would be empty by default in all of these things if we didn't choose to do it. So I don't think that we have a policy, like we have a structural problem in the spec, but maybe the fact that we don't have a way of describing build and launch dependencies or something like that has encouraged us to put too much in the BOM than we otherwise might have needed to or should have.
The bill of materials as the build plan as a mechanism of build pack communication around build time dependencies is very useful and is used that way a lot, right? And so tying that in the spec to the bill of materials as an output, right? Like it's a huge foot gun at best, right?
Yeah, I mean, it does require you to, you can clear that information out if you choose to, right? Once it's been communicated to you, you can remove it if you feel that that's appropriate to do.
But like,
yeah, I guess like with Steven's point, it's just like setting people up for success by default of just like out of the gate, if you're like learning this on the fly, you're going to use this thing, and you may not realize that you're putting a bunch of stuff necessarily in the bill of materials by default.
Yeah.
Whereas a flag makes it a little more clear that you are.
Forrest on the Pacato team has an RFC he's working on that adds kind of further contractualizes the build plan in some ways that have come up. I think Ben, it incorporates a lot of your feedback from the last kind of set of proposed changes. One of those is a set of capabilities around launch and build. And so when that comes up, we can bring this up again and figure out if that will help solve some of these problems, because I suspect it will.
Yeah. So let's circle this to close down this discussion. Let's circle it back to Paul's actual PR here, his RFC. What do we want to see out of this? An update to the RFC that takes report.toml into account, or like what do we think is an actionable outcome of this discussion?
I would vote for yes, providing build and launch layer metadata in report toml, and just providing launch layer metadata in the image due to the reproducibility issue.
How do you feel about that, Paul?
That sounds fair. I want to look into the report toml PR myself. Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds great.
Oh, if you ping me on Slack, I could help with the report toml stuff. We even had a like mock-up of what it would look like in report toml at one point.
Great, thanks.
Awesome. I think that was the last item on the agenda. Is there anything else anybody wants to chat about? I really appreciate you showing up, Paul. You're always welcome. We really like any external contributions we get from people who don't show up regularly. So please turn into a regular contributor if you're interested. Really appreciate your presence here.
Yeah, right on. It's Buildpacks are really cool. I mean, we have our we have our little dinky platform at Greenhouse, but it's great. It's much better than what we're moving away from.
It's great to hear.
Yeah. If the meeting's over, are there? Oh, go ahead, Terrence.
I was just going to say it'd be great to hear about how you're using Buildpacks at Greenhouse at some point. It doesn't have to be today, but would love to have you back to talk about that. We did that with Cigna, I think, like a few weeks back, and that was immensely informative to the team.
Yeah, I would love to. Yeah, we can talk about it for sure.
That'd be amazing.
Okay. Is there anyone should I just show up at some point in the future, or should we like?
We can just slot you in on like an agenda thing if you have a specific date, or you can just show up and then we can put you at the top of the agenda.
Yeah, like the agenda doc's open. Yeah, the agenda doc's open, so you can just add your name if you want to. Probably as a heads up, you might just let one of the leadership team know in the Slack, so we encourage everybody else to attend and move meetings around to make sure we're here to see it.
The Wednesday meetings tend to have sometimes a third more, sometimes twice as many people show up. Those are the larger ones. And the Thursday ones are the people who really tend to regularly show up and work on the project all the time. If that's helpful for kind of gauging what audience you want to talk to.
Okay, yeah, that's all useful information. I'll talk to the it's me and like one other dude that are working on this platform. So I'll talk to him about it, and we'll see when we can come and talk.
Cool. Great.
Awesome. All right. I think that's it. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.